That's right, folks. Another episode of the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast. On today's show, we break down the top slot versus wide matchups and how it will impact Week 3. Before we do, I want to make sure you follow us across the board at Razzball Fantasy on YouTube, IG, and TikTok. And, of course, make sure you subscribe to the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel because we have our Sunday Live Start Sit Show for 2 hours this Sunday. So join us every Sunday for your Start Sit questions. But today's show, top wide receiver matchups, starting right now on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. And here we fresh off the boat, by the way. The man literally just got off a boat, a cruise for the week. Joins us live right now. It's Ben Wasley. Go follow him at Fantasy First Down No O on Twitter. What's going on, Ben?
Oh, it's good to be back. I'm really happy to have actual internet here now. I don't have to wait 30 seconds of load time every time I want to look something up. I can actually watch the games instead of YouTubing highlights. I'm very excited to get back into fantasy football. If I'm a little bit shorter on analysis this week, I've done my best based on what the boat would give me.
Yeah, and honestly, Ben, I hope you got your sea legs out there, but you're back on land. I hope you have your fantasy football legs, my friend, because we're here to talk wide receiver matchups today. And we can't I want to give you a little bit of a pass, but I can't. We're in it, man. We got to get going into the analysis, my friend. All right, so today we're going to break down the top 5 matchups for this week. Obviously, we're going to talk about the top 5 out wide matchups and also the 5 notable slot matchups. Obviously, when we go through this each and every week, we want to identify things that are going to help your fantasy lineups and in some cases talk about some studs who could be DFS plays. So out wide is where you have the meat on the bone. So we do our top 5 out wide matchups because every team has pretty much an outside receiver. When we get to the slot section and you're watching this show, there is a little more nuance. We have to find teams that actually use their slot receiver and actually has more targets in the middle of the field. So that's the caveat. That's why when you see the show later today, you're going to see notable slot matchups instead of the top 5. But too much information. Let's just get into the fun part and let's talk about these matchups. First off, we have the top 5. You have the Vikings going against the Chargers, who allowed the most fantasy points out wide. Then it's the Baltimore Ravens versus the Colts, Browns versus the Titans, Buccaneers versus the Eagles, and Chiefs versus the Bears. Now, when you look at this first matchup, obviously Justin Jefferson going up against the Chargers, no-brainer start. But the question for that one is, Ben, is he going to be in your DFS lineups? Is it worth buying up for? But the real one for redraft leagues is Jordan Addison. Is he a viable start in Week 3? What's your thoughts about this matchup?
Look, it's a juicy matchup, though it's hard to know exactly how juicy it is, given this really was kind of, exaggerated how bad the Chargers were based on some of their early season matchups, taking on some really good wide receivers. Having said that, today they're taking on the best wide receiver in football, in my opinion, Justin Jefferson. You're going to start him in actual fantasy and DFS? Maybe. I mean, he's not the guy I'd go for, but maybe in one or two I'd put Justin Jefferson in. Jordan Addison's the really interesting one, though. The problem is he's only running routes on about 60% of plays, 65% of plays, something like that. That's not enough. That's not enough for an outside receiver. Having said that, he's going to have some big plays. We saw that last week where he had a big play, and it kind of saved your week. Having said that, this week he's very much a dodgy flex play for me.
All right, so you don't have him locked in as a wide receiver 3. It sounds like it's more situational for you. Yeah, I think I'm going to get it. I think I'm going to get him in. I just think it's first of all, they're playing at home in a dome, which you got to love. I love that Justin Herbert and company is going up against a Vikings secondary that is suspect in their own ways. So there could be a lot of, at least the tempo will be there. Maybe the points won't be there, but I think the tempo and the kind of offenses that we're playing, no Austin Eckler on one side, Alexander Mattison and the Vikings struggling on the ground. On the other side, Cam Akers doesn't sound ready. This does sound like a pass-first offensive teams for both sides, which I like. The other notable things, 5 wide receivers in double-digit fantasy points. So that's a nice floor for Jordan Addison this week, especially because number 2s have played well. Listen, Jalen Waddle's basically a 1. He went 4 for 78. Treylon Burks, 3 for 76. That spotty Titans offense. But both those guys at least got into double figures in PPR, so I like that. J.C. Jackson, a notable outside cornerback, has been banged up early on this season, so I could see Addison, even if he's matched up with that top corner, he could win that matchup, especially at less than 100%. So far this season, 4 for 61 and 3 for 72. So it is kind of married to touchdowns and big plays, but I think this matchup might be a good recipe for that. Let's jump down to the next one. It is Zay Flowers versus the Colts. Now, the Colts defense has allowed the second most fantasy points out wide. 5 wide receivers in double digits already this season. 4 of them had 15 PPR points. Holy cow. So what's your thoughts about Zay Flowers in this matchup? Is he a locked-in wide receiver too, and are you trying to get him in your DFS lineups?
I think the problem with the Ravens at the moment is they're kind of going down that Chiefs approach of a little bit of a committee approach at wide receiver. There's not really clear number 1 and 2. It is Flowers and OBJ, but they're not playing 100% of snaps, and that makes them a little bit scary to start with. The second issue is they've got Lamar Jackson throwing them the ball, and that's going to be scary every week because you just never know exactly what he's going to do. If you had a more secure quarterback, you might feel better about this matchup. Having said that, I'm still starting Zay Flowers. I think in most leagues, he's a very low-end wide receiver too, strong flex play. So I'm happy to put him in lineups. And I'm interested in Rashad Bateman now that OBJ is out for the game. I think Bateman will play a lot of snaps. I think he's the kind of guy that you can slot in as a cheap DFS option. Or if you're in a really deep, like 14, 16 team league, I've got him in one of those, and I'll definitely be starting him there as well.
So the other aspect of this is OBJ is out. So that is going to be a boost for him. And when you're looking at the target distribution through 2 weeks, and Odell didn't play a full game the second game, I get that. Andrews didn't play the first game, I get that. But he's got 15 targets. The rest of the team, no one else has 10. So he is kind of separating himself a little bit. The other aspect of this is the Colts matchup. The Colts, first of all, Calvin Ridley, 8 for 101 and 1. Nico Collins, 7 for 146 and 1. So, and Zay Flowers, if you identify where he's getting his fantasy points, it is coming out wide. If you go check out razzball.com, we actually show you that on our tool. So you can actually see where they're getting their points. And I also like his kind of PPR floor, 9 for 78 week 1, 4 for 62. So he's offering you double-digit fantasy points in more difficult matchups. And now he gets an elite matchup against the Colts. I got him locked in as a wide receiver too, and I'm getting him in my DFS lineups this week. All right, let's jump down to the next one. It's Amari Cooper. And yes, I got to tell you, we were kind of all a little hesitant on him because of the injury, but he came out and played pretty well. 7 for 90 against Pittsburgh on Monday night. The Titans now, he gets a great matchup. 3rd in the NFL in fantasy points allowed out wide. 5 wide receivers once again in double-digit fantasy points. So that's also notable. Another team that's allowing a bunch of fantasy production. What's your thoughts about Amari Cooper in this matchup? And maybe we could sprinkle in DPJ in a deeper league. What's your thoughts there?
Look, I love Amari Cooper. I really regretted not starting him in more leagues last week. I was just a little bit scared off by the injury, and that was a big mistake in quite a few leagues. This week, I'm definitely starting him in the majority of my leagues. He's someone that you drafted relatively early. He is a wide receiver too, and you should be starting him in the majority of leagues, not just because it's a good matchup, but simply because he's a good player. He is the focal point of this offense, especially now that Nick Chubb's out. They're going to need to throw a lot, you'd have to expect. So I'm definitely starting him. In fact, I like Elijah Moore a lot this week, and I know he's more of a slot guy, but he's getting a lot of targets too. So I think between them, both of them are really strong plays.
I'm in on a Cooper. I think after last week, what he showed, Deshaun Watson can't get uglier, right? I mean, at this point, and he actually gave you 7 for 90 at a bum wheel. Now he's got this elite matchup against the Titans. The notable performances against the Titans so far. Keenan Allen, 8 for 111 and 2. Mike Williams, 8 for 83. Chris Olave, 8 for 112. Rashid Shaheed, 5 for 89. Michael Thomas, 5 for 61. On top of that, Christian Fulton, pretty much hurt, not going to play most likely. Caleb Farley still not back, really banged up. Elijah Moore is the notable one here because, like you brought up, he is more slot focused. But this season, through 2 weeks, 48% of his fantasy production has come from the out wide. So he's almost a 50-50 guy. So that's notable. And he's also getting more targets. DPJ is probably like a nice DFS dart throw. I am not going to put him in my season-long league. But if you have him in best ball, this might be the week he pops off in your lineup. But he's also an interesting guy in DFS because he is a deeper threat. But if I'm going to pick, I'm going to go Amari Cooper locked in wide receiver 2. And if I'm going to go for a deeper name, it will be Elijah Moore based on what we're seeing from the fantasy production. All right, let's jump down to number 4. We've got Mike Evans and Chris Godwin going against the Eagles. And I know everybody on here is going to say, Chris Godwin, Bob, he's a slot receiver. And I will tell you that surprisingly, he's actually not. Even though he does run about 2/3 of his snaps in the slot, ironically, almost half of his fantasy points come from the middle of the field and also out wide. So it's like a perfect balance. So that's why he's on the list here as well. Right now, the Eagles with Darius Slay basically expected to be the only really healthy corner. Maddox is out. Bradbury's banged up. So there's a lot of injuries to that secondary, a bunch of injuries to the safeties. They allow the fourth most fantasy points out wide. 4 wide receivers in double digits in fantasy points in PPR, 3 over 15 PPR points per game. What's your thoughts about the Mike Evans and Chris Godwin heading into week 3?
Yeah, I think the Buccaneers have surprised a lot of people this year. If you go to my week 3 streamers and stashes article, you'll find that Baker Mayfield is a streamer this week for me as quarterback. I really feel like he's going to be able to attack this Eagles secondary. Plus, he's been a lot better this year against tough secondaries than we expected. So I'm really happy with how he's cooking so far. And this is a really juicy matchup for him. Mike Evans in particular is someone I know a lot of people were nervous about as to whether Baker Mayfield could get the ball to him. I think he's proven he can. So we got Mike Evans. He's a guy who just, has 1,000-yard seasons for fun. So you've got to start Mike Evans. You've got to start Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin's going to get a heap of targets in PPR. He's always a fantastic play. But I'm starting both of these guys in every single league.
So does the Darius Slay potential shadow matchup, because he did follow Justin Jefferson, does that kind of give you a little pause on Mike Evans potentially?
I mean, Justin Jefferson still went well over 100 yards. I feel like Mike Evans is someone who's very good with contested catches, and I feel like Baker Mayfield's someone who will be willing to throw him the ball even if he's being covered. So I feel like he's still going to get targets. He's still going to make big plays. He is a little bit more of a boom-bust kind of guy than Chris Godwin, but he's someone that I feel like you're going to regret it badly if you don't start him.
Yeah, I think Mike Evans has earned his way in a tougher, maybe shadow matchup as a flex, no matter what, wide receiver 3 flex. You're probably very rarely going to have an opportunity to sit him. I agree. I think Chris Godwin's the notable one. I think he's actually someone I'm interested in playing. If you look at the guys who actually beat up on the Eagles so far, Justin Jefferson went off 11 for 159. Kendrick Bourne caught 2 touchdowns, which is nice, but that props up the numbers a little bit. Jordan Addison, 3 for 72 and 1. KJ Osborne also found the end zone as well. It's the injuries, though. James Bradbury and Avadi Maddox out. Like, I just have a feeling that Godwin's going to be a solid wide receiver 3 flex this week because of the injuries to the Eagles secondary. And I do think Darius Slay will follow Mike Evans, which might give a little boost to Chris Godwin. My bold take this week is Chris Godwin over Mike Evans in this matchup. But here's a nice tribute for you. The last time they faced Todd Bowles, my apologies. Last time they faced Shane Diassi, the DC for the Eagles now. Chris Godwin, 8 for 111 and 1. Mike Evans, 6 for 76 and 3. So the last time they faced this defensive coordinator, it was fireworks for the Tampa Bay Bucks. All right, let's go down to the next one. This one's a little more confusing. And what I mean that is, who is the actual Chiefs receivers to basically pick? All right. I think you'd be surprised if you actually isolate the production for these guys. In the banner, we say MVS and Sky Moore, but Justin Watson has to be in consideration here as well. He's been getting a lot of snaps from, on the field with these guys too. The Bears have allowed the 5th most points out wide, 3 wide receivers in double digits. 2 have hit 15 PPR points per game. What's your thoughts about the Chiefs wide receivers? Is there one you're kind of thinking about more than the other versus the Bears?
Look, I don't think I'm breaking new ground to say this is an absolute mess and a nightmare for fantasy. I think we all wanted pieces of this wide receiver room and thought, Patrick Mahomes, you've got to have these guys. But the reality is that none of them are really someone you can confidently start. I think Sky Moore's probably the closest. He's not really had the production yet, but at least he's getting the snaps. We know that MVS is going to at least be involved a little bit as well. He's also going to have a high snap count, but he's not someone they're going to force the ball to either. I feel like Sky Moore has the potential to at least have a high reception game if he's someone that Patrick Mahomes starts to latch onto. But until we see it, I can't start him, especially against the Bears, where I feel like they can probably just use the ground game all day and they don't need to focus on their receivers. Just go ground game and Travis Kelce. Justin Watson's going to be that, the deep guy. And I feel like in DFS, if you're really desperate for someone, he's someone you can use. But they're going to scheme Kadarius Toney some touches, assuming he's healthy. They're going to get Rashee Rice involved, especially in the red zone. So all of these guys have a role, but none of them have a role that is consistent throughout the whole game and is going to give them either a high target count or alternatively a high opportunity count. So I'm avoiding everyone, basically.
Yeah, I think that's probably the smart answer. Sky Moore did play well last week. He did find the end zone as well, 70 yards receiving. But if you're just looking at the numbers, it's very convoluted. Like MVS has run the most out wide snaps, but he's only got 5 targets through 2 weeks. He seems like an afterthought. The player that you probably, if you're going to take a DFS dart throw this week, it's Justin Watson. I think that Patrick Mahomes, after the last 2 weeks, and especially last week against Jacksonville, they want to get right. And they're going to want to throw a bunch. They're going to want to get this whole thing rolling. I'm calling my DFS shot. I think Justin Watson catches a long one for a touchdown this week, and I like it. But if I'm doing redraft, MVS is off the radar for me. He just seems like he's out there running routes and not getting a lot of targets. I think Sky Moore, after he could maybe build off that week last week, would be my favorite redraft. But if I'm talking DFS, I'm probably going to go Justin Watson as a deeper name to watch. All right, let's answer a couple questions before we get into this. Before our slot matchups. So pick 2. 1 flex and 1 wide receiver, full PPR. Big Trev, like that. Great batting there. Got T. Higgins, Rashad White, Joshua Kelly, Amari Cooper. What's your thoughts here, Ben?
Higgins and Cooper. Next, it's PPR. You got to start your wide receivers. They're going to get targets. We know it's a great matchup for Cooper, and I'm going to start Higgins. Even with Burrow a bit knocked up, I still want to start him over those guys.
I actually think this is really easy for me. I'm actually going to go Joshua Kelly and Amari Cooper. I'm going to give Joshua Kelly another shot. Amari Cooper, we just talked about, love the matchup, but Joshua Kelly played the Titans last week. And how many times do we have to do this? The Titans' run defense is so good that they just allow all their production through the air. Joshua Kelly didn't do anything. And then this week he's got Minnesota, which I think it's a top 10 matchup in our adjusted line yards metric. I'm going to go give it one more shot with Josh Kelly, get him in my lineup alongside Amari Cooper. This one right here, Tyler, I'm not even going to, I think it's Tyler and then a lot of other things. I'm not going to get to that. Anyway, start Jordan Addison over DJ Moore. So we have DJ Moore against Kansas City, and then we have Jordan Addison going up against, who we just talked about, the, who are they going up? Sorry, Chargers. What's your thoughts here?
I'm starting DJ Moore. It's hard to feel very confident about DJ Moore, but he's at least clearly the number one option, and they're trying to get the ball to him, especially because they're talking about at least trying to use him a little bit more and trying to get Justin Fields throwing more. Jordan Addison, you just have no idea what's going to happen. It could be an absolute dud game like it looked like it was going to be last week, or he could have a couple of really big touchdowns. It could go either way. I'm personally not risking it, especially in PPR. I'm going with Moore.
I'm going to go with Moore. I think this is a get. I think the Bears are going to come out. Their offensive line's really banged up, which is not good against Chris Jones. I think that's going to actually hurt them running the football. I think Justin Fields is going to – the only way I can describe it, last season, when you watch the games down the stretch, they got him outside the pocket. He made a lot of plays outside of the pocket, bootlegs, and they just stopped doing that the first 2 weeks. He's been in the pocket. He looks terrible. I think they're going to get back to basics with him, get him out, rolling out, and I think the Chiefs are going to just crush them offensively. And so you're going to get a lot of volume from the Bears, and I think DJ Moore and Justin Fields are going to have a nice week for fantasy, so I like that. Last one before we move on to the slot matchup, we got Ertz or Schultz. DFS question from Jamie. Who do you got here?
I've got to lean towards Ertz. It's really tough with him because he's realistically only running about 25 to 30 routes a game, and that's not usually enough. But he's such a target for Joshua Dobbs at the moment that you kind of have to trust that's going to keep happening. On the other hand, with Schultz, they played a lot of snaps the last couple of weeks. Schultz therefore ran a lot of routes and wasn't really getting the targets. He's just not honing in on his tight end, CJ Stroud. So until I see that change, he's someone that I'd want to hold on to in fantasy. But in DFS, I'm probably leaning towards Ertz. I just think the upside is a little bit higher of the opportunity of getting a whole lot of targets like he has, unlike most other tight ends.
Because it's DraftKings, it's really easy. Like that, DraftKings is full PPR and FanDuel's half. So I think Ertz because of the volume. But I would say a deeper name to look at, Jamie, is Cade Otton. I like him this week against the Eagles. The Eagles have been just getting crushed, and I know he's cheap on DFS. So you could probably even save more money, drop down to Cade Otton, and bump up somewhere else. That would be my take. But I would go Ertz over Schultz, especially in PPR. All right, let's get into the slot matchups for this week. The notable matchups include, we got the Colts versus the Ravens, Rams versus the Bengals, Packers versus Saints, Cowboys versus the Cardinals, and Panthers versus the Seahawks. Let's talk about the first one. A lot of rookies today, folks. Josh Downs versus the Ravens. Obviously, the Ravens have been a little susceptible on the most fantasy points to slot receivers, or basically interior receiver. I shouldn't say slot guys. There could be guys playing on the inside who play mostly on the outside. The most fantasy points to the slot, not necessarily slot receivers, okay? Notable performances, Tyler Boyd, just last week, 6 for 52, another great 1-for-1. What's your thoughts about Josh Downs versus the Ravens this week?
I like him more than I have the last few weeks. I like the fact that it's Gardner Minshew now throwing to him. I feel like that's going to open up more opportunities for really all the receivers. Not because necessarily he's a better quarterback, but you're not going to lose a whole heap of touches based on his legs. The other thing I really like about it is the fact that Josh Downs is starting to get a little bit more accustomed to the offense. He's someone they do go to a little bit. I feel like there's opportunities there. Would I start him in fantasy though? Look, I'd have to be pretty desperate. For me, he's like a wide receiver 6 or something like that. He's down in the 70s. But if I'm really desperate or if I just want something in a PPR DFS, so the DraftKings, then he's someone I might slot in if I just absolutely have to.
The Ravens secondary is decimated by injuries right now. So I honestly do not think you could put him as a wide receiver 3. Like when we talk about these slot, we talked about this a lot last week, right? A lot of those guys, like Adam Thielen had a really nice game, which is great. But a lot of these guys are more wide receiver 4s. Like when they have a good matchup at PPR, like Josh Downs right now is like 3.5 receptions, 35 yards in the first 2 weeks, right? So he might be able to get you to 5 for 55 range, which is great for PPR. But we're not going to run out and start him. But I do think if you're looking for a DFS buy down, it's Josh Downs. I like him a lot in this matchup. Gardner Minshew, like you brought up, he's not going to run as much as Anthony Richardson. So I think that's going to be key as well. But I think there's better guys that you could play this week, including the next player on our list, which is Tutu Atwell against the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals have allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to the interior over the first 2 weeks. Notable player Nelson Aguilar had in his entire production last week from the slot, 5 for 63 and 1. What's your thoughts about Tutu Atwell versus the Bengals?
Look, I love the upside here. There's a lot of target opportunity. I know Puka Nacua is going to be involved, but even if he's slightly banged up, that might open up a whole lot of opportunities for Tutu Atwell. Matthew Stafford, we tend to forget he's actually very good. And the O-line's pretty strong this year compared to how it's been at times in the past. Because their defense is a little bit dodgy, I like the fact that they're ending up in a lot of shootouts. They've got a good tempo to their offense, so it gives them a lot of opportunity. Atwell's someone that I want to be starting. More of a flex option and a PPR option, but he's someone that I like putting in if I have the opportunity to.
I agree. I think he's locked in wide receiver 3 this week, over being completely outshined by Puka. And Puka, hey, got to tip the cap. Our top 5 sleeper show, we talked about Van Jefferson. Boy, were we wrong about the player, but we were right about the situation. Like I did say multiple times that Matthew Stafford's a talent elevator. He elevated the other talent. Van Jefferson, I'm sorry, but you're done. Anyway, but Tutu Atwell, being overlooked, 6th in the NFL in slot yards, 3rd in the NFL in slot receptions, currently the wide receiver 16 in PPR. This guy is a locked and loaded wide receiver 2. I could think he's an easy wide receiver 3 this week, and I love the matchup against Cincinnati as well. Let's jump down to another rookie, Jayden Reed. Jayden Reed plays against the Saints this week. The Saints have allowed the 4th most fantasy points to the interior. That's where Jayden Reed makes his money. Nick Westbrook-Akine, believe it or not, 4 for 58 from the slot. Adam Thielen last week, 7 for 54 and 1 against the New Orleans Saints. What's your thoughts about Jayden Reed potentially sneaking into your lineups this week?
I've picked him up in quite a few leagues. He's someone that interests me a little bit. He's kind of not quite a wide receiver 3, but he's someone I consider there or in the flex. I feel like he's got opportunities for a lot of targets. It's a game where I'd be a little bit nervous about a lot of the other, especially of the Packers running backs. And if they're forced to throw, they're probably going to have to go to Reed and also to Romeo Dobbs. So both of those guys become options. But because the slot matchup is a little bit stronger, I'd say Reed's someone I'd go to, even though he's still really only on the field in 11 personnel.
So the interesting thing about Reed is that he's leading the offense, leading the team in production right now. So Christian Watson's been in lineup. Doesn't sound like he'll be back yet, but currently through 2 weeks, 6 for 85, 2 touchdowns, 11 targets. The only player in double digits through the first 2 weeks on the Green Bay Packers, which is interesting. Because like you said, he's not on the field every time, but he is getting some notable production.
60%.
Yeah. which should be higher with Watson out, which is a little concerning, but they have a role for him. He's like, you're playing the slot. That's it. I think due to the fact that you also look at guys like Marcus May going to be out for the Saints, that Jaden Reed's another one of these guys that I kind of view as Josh Downs. I'm not going to run out to start him, but I do think that if you're someone who's been dealing with a lot of injuries over the last few weeks and you need a flex play and or a wide receiver 4, I think Jaden Reed is going to get you double-digit fantasy points in PPR this week. I think he's going to be fine. A decent matchup against the Saints. The Saints' offense is better than what the Packers have faced the last few weeks, too. I think the Atlanta Falcons are like a complete – they suck the life out of other offenses because the way they run the football. But so I do like the matchup. I'm into it. Let's jump down to number 4. Now, this one, of course, like we talked about last week with Amon-Ra St. Brown, who had a very productive day, 6 catches, over 100 yards. Here's a notable stud who plays a lot in this, that is placing a Cardinals DST that has allowed the 5th most fantasy points to the interior. Notable guys like Curtis Samuel, 5 receptions, 54 yards. Paris Campbell, not a lot of yards, but had 4 catches last week against this team in the slot. What can a guy like CeeDee Lamb do in this game? Do you think he's a lock and loaded DFS play in this matchup?
Well, I mean, it's a locked and loaded fantasy play, but in DFS, I don't feel great about it. I just don't feel like the upside's there. It seems like the kind of game where the Cowboys just aren't going to need to use him a lot. I'm sure he'll be involved, but I don't think there's that big explosive upside of the high point scoring game where they have to throw a lot because they're chasing and it's back and forth and everything's happening. It just feels like the kind of game where they get an early lead and then they don't need to do anything in particular. They can just kind of cruise the rest of the way, if we've seen them do at times. That makes him a little bit scary. And if you're going to pay up for someone, I want someone with, I guess, more accessible, more likely to be attained upside.
Yeah, I actually think last year, of course, Jonathan Gannon is now the DC head coach in the Arizona. He was the Eagles DC last year. Lamb had he had a 10 for 120 and 2 against that defense, and then he also had 5 for 68. So it's like you just said, it could be a 5 for 68 performance, which is fine for regular, but his price point at DFS might be bad. But if you get you that 10 for 120 and 2, this is the type of stuff where I feel like his production, with Brandon Cooks kind of dealing with his situation, he's looking like he's going to play, but it's still like we're not sure what's going on with Brandon Cooks right now. Michael Gallup hasn't looked the same. I think that CeeDee Lamb is probably – and, like, the Cardinals have been better than we thought. Like, the Cardinals' offense last week against the Giants, but, the Giants are the Giants. But, yeah.
It's the Giants.
Josh. All right. Okay. All right. Let's calm
Sorry,
down
you can
here.
say it. I understand.
Exactly. I can say it. You can. Anyway, Dobbs has looked okay enough to maybe move the ball a little bit. Trayvon Diggs is now out for the season, so maybe that helps. But you're right. You're probably right. It's probably best to kind of view him. There's probably better upside plays, but I'm going to have him in my lineups this week. I think he's probably locked into 100 yards receiving this week. I just think he's probably going to be good to go, especially with how good the Arizona Cardinals have looked so far. All right, let's talk about the last one. It's Adam Thielen. And if we were 3 weeks in, now, Andy Dalton, by the way, the Red Rifle's back, fellow Ginger. God bless America, baby. Love the Gingers are finally get their shine again. Andy Dalton in the lineup. I actually think that's not a bad thing for these guys because Andy Dalton's just going to be, he's going to get the ball delivered. That's what he's going to do. He's not going to be anything spectacular. But last week, Adam Thielen looked pretty strong. He's got a great matchup against Seattle again, who's 7th most fantasy points allowed. Tutu Atwell, 6 for 119, and also Amon-Ra St. Brown, 6 for 102. Adam Thielen, is he somebody you're looking at maybe as a wide receiver 3 this week?
Look, Adam Thielen's looks really good this year, and I think anyone that says that Andy Dalton is a massive downgrade from Bryce Young hasn't seen Bryce Young play. He's looked really dodgy to start the year, and he's a rookie. I'm not holding that against him. That's pretty typical. We know that quarterbacks struggle in their rookie season. We talked about that in the preseason, so we expected that to be the case. Andy Dalton should come in and struggle as well because he's Andy Dalton. He's not a great quarterback. He's a backup quarterback, but he's good enough to give Adam Thielen a whole lot of targets. In fact, I think Adam Thielen is the receiver that I would really want here for Carolina at the moment. I know they've got DJ Chark, I should say. Don't say that 3 times quickly. DJ Chark should be back, and I feel like he's at least going to be involved, and he's going to be running more routes than he did last week, but Thielen's the guy that I definitely want, especially given the Seahawks matchup.
Dalton last year in his 14 games as the New Orleans Saints starter averaged about 200 yards passing a game. He did have a couple nice performances overall, but he is what he is. The one thing that he struggles the most in is deep passing at this stage of his career. He was terrible last year targeting Chris Olave deep, but that doesn't mean that he can't make the short throws to guys like Adam Thielen. I think this is kind of like a perfect match for where Thielen's the slot guy, short routes, intermediate at best. That's where Dalton's probably going to want to throw the football the most. So I think that you're probably going to get, dare I say, wide receiver 3 production this week from Thielen. I think he's someone that you can plop in your lineup if you need him. Like we talk about every week, we have to protect ourselves and say we're not starting Adam Thielen over our studs. But I think he is someone because of the matchup. I think Seattle's going to be able to move the football against Carolina. So I think this is actually a decent matchup for him as well. Let's jump down some questions before we close out the show. We also have weekly streamers and stashes from Ben, which we'll get to in a second. But let's answer some questions here. Are we worried about Amon-Ra St. Brown? I think he's actually trending in the right direction. He had like this mild turf toe. Last week was the bigger issue. We always recommend Camden Harris. We appreciate you being on, man. Go to SixScore.com. SixScore is a sports injury central. They actually give you player grades for how injured they are and how healthy they are. So Amon-Ra St. Brown is someone that's trending in the right direction. It was a mild turf toe. I'm not worried about it. He just put up 6 for 102. And he's supposed to be bagged up. And then this week he has a decent matchup as well. So I'm not worried about Amon-Ra. What's your thoughts, Ben?
I'm nervous simply because any injury is always something that could go wrong. And if you're talking about one of your lower guys, you're kind of like, well, look, if he goes badly, he goes badly. He might have played badly anyway. But with St. Brown, you're expecting him to produce. And if he's got an injury and something goes wrong and he doesn't produce, that's going to leave a bigger hole than it would have been for another player. So I'm nervous, but you have to start him. You have no choice. Unless we hear reports that he's on a significant snap count or something like that, I feel like you have to start St. Brown. But turf toe injuries do tend to be the kind of thing that can really restrict receivers. We saw a lot of nerves around that with Terry McLaurin in the preseason as well. So he's someone that you're going to start, but you're going to have to really carefully check the reports before game time just to make sure that there's no snap count issues.
So just to give you an idea of our slot first wide tool, okay? So what we do is we look at, and this is basically the whole show is based on this. So Camden, we always recommend you go check it out on Razzball. Go to the fantasy data tab, and it's all in there. So we have a slot first wide tool. There's only 7 teams in the NFL that allow 50% of their production to the slot to wide receivers. One of those teams is the Atlanta Falcons. So that's who Detroit's playing this week. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to be fine. He's going to do his thing. I am not sweating it at all. The next question we have here is Reed or Tank Dell this week. I'm going to go Jaden Reed. I think these guys are kind of in similar situations. Both guys are kind of playing, part-time roles, I want to say, not full-time players just yet. The matchup favors Reed, but also the Houston offense it's a lot of garbage. At least they're making up for it at garbage time, which I appreciate. From a fantasy perspective, at least do it at garbage time. If you get blown out, at least give us a touchdown or two late like they did last week against the Colts. What's your thoughts here, Ben? Are you doing Reed or Tank Dell?
I'm doing Reed, but it's close. I think Tank Dell is someone you can definitely play this week. I kind of like the matchup against the Jaguars. I like the fact that with Noah Brown out, he's now got a starting role. I think that's positive. So I feel like he's someone that you can easily play and feel at least confident there's some upside there that could mean it helps your fantasy team.
Yeah, I mean, Dell had a very productive game last week, 7 for 72 and 1. So I can understand the thought process here. Yeah, the Jags D, though, man, they looked pretty good against the Chiefs. I don't know. I'm going to stick with Reed. You don't agree?
17 wide receivers. It's really hard. I would go with Reed.
It's just the Chiefs. Who would have thought after 2 weeks we'd hear a statement come out of Ben's mouth? It's just the Chiefs. All right.
As a Chiefs fan, that's exactly what I'm going to say. Yeah, it's just the Chiefs wide receivers. Yeah.
Ben, the floor is yours, man. Make sure you go check out Ben's article every week, weekly streamers and stashes. Tell the people any names that we haven't discussed on the show maybe that you think are a good streamer and stash.
Yeah, look, speaking of the Chiefs, Isaiah Pacheco and really the Chiefs' run game in general is going to be interesting this week because they take on the Bears, who've just been blown up on the ground for as long as I can remember, ultimately. So he's someone that becomes interesting when he wouldn't normally be. Even like guys like Jerick McKinnon, who gets a lot of goal line snaps. They like to pass it on the goal line, so they often go to McKinnon. He's been terrible most of the time, but this feels like a kind of game where it could be high scoring. He's an interesting DFS play if you just want to go in a different direction. Especially on DraftKings. Stashes are, I mean, look, everyone's picked up Jerome Ford, but if you'd been reading my article, you would have picked him up a week or two ago and you would have been able to save yourself a whole lot of fat. I talk every week about the best running backs to pick up. And while I can't predict who will get injured, I can predict who will be really good if there's an injury. And we knew that if Nick Chubb went down, that Jerome Ford would be fantastic. So if you missed Jerome Ford, then go to the article. I list out all the best options in order and tell you who you should pick up, stash on your bench, and if there's a running back injury, you've got yourself a running back one, baby.
Jerome Ford is like a speed freak too. He's actually, when I first started the process, he was in my top 150 this year because of the fact that I was genuinely surprised that when I first thought of him, I thought he was like this satellite back. And then when I started doing the research on him, I'm like, this dude is huge. He's a big man who can run. And I'm like, okay, and they let Kareem Hunt walk. I know Kareem Hunt is now back, and people are going to be a little worried about that. And Kareem Hunt's probably going to be more involved than Jerome Ford was versus Nick Chubb. I agree. But I think Ford is probably the lead guy. He looked awesome, by the way, against the Steelers. And the Steelers, I know they're going through their thing with Kenny Pickett, but their defense is still kind of legit. So I do like that call out. Especially if you didn't get a chance, go check out his article. Make sure you go follow him on Twitter at Fantasy First Down. No, go to his website. Check it all out. The guy's fantastic. He's dominant when it comes to rankings. Go check out his rankings as well across the board. Ben, we do appreciate being on the show as well. Now, we do have a couple more questions, but you know what? Join us on Sunday Live, folks. We are on for at least 2 hours before kickoff every Sunday. We answer all your start-sit questions. We do injury updates, weather updates, every matchup, everything you need to know before kickoff. So join us on the Sunday Live show. And make sure you subscribe to the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel, IG and TikTok. And, of course, make sure you jump over to razzball.com. Check out those great articles. We're doing some big things. I probably have to tell you that my favorite article is my kicker article. It's just fun to write about kickers. So go check it out and stream some kickers. Yeah, baby. Thank you once again. We are out of here, folks.